Why do you support Project Censored? I know that their last year's book was on your essential reading list. Why?
Because Project Censored focuses on the courageous media that publishes articles that the mass media doesn't cover. And it does it in a very clear way, and the selection process, I think, has been pretty effective. They take really important subjects that are censored out by the networks or the major newspapers, and they find it being covered, say, in Mother Jones or Multinational Monitor or Nation magazine, and they highlight it. So it's a memorable way to show how much censorship there is still in the media, because these topics that they select are extremely important ones. They're not marginal, trivial matters.
Do you think media censorship is more of a problem now than ever before?
Well, in some ways there's more disclosure and reporting because of the internet, because of the blogs and the websites and the worldwide range. Like if you can't find the story reported in the US, you get it from the Guardian or the independent newspapers, or some newspaper abroad, or you see it on Al Jazeera. So in that sense it's better than the past. And the second, though, there's far more censorship of citizen activity trying to do something about the very revelations that are reported in the newspapers. So you get great featured stories that are Pulitzer Prize winning in the New York Times and Washington Post and Wall Street Journal. And then when people rally or march or file lawsuits or give testimony about the very abuses that these papers have exposed, they don't cover the citizen efforts. That is worse by far. For example, we used to be able to get on the Phil Donahue show. There's no more Phil Donahue show. He opened the door for the women's movement, the consumer movement, the environmental movement, the displaced worker movement, like no one before, with a huge audience of 8 million people. Nothing has replaced him since he closed down in 1996. We used to get on Mike Douglas and Merv Griffin shows. They were largely entertainment shows, but they felt a responsibility to devote maybe 10-15% of their time to serious activities going on. They have, of course, been replaced by these sadomasochistic shows that are on afternoon daily TV. So things are really going down. A lot of seasoned reporters have been laid off, or that their contract has been bought out, and so that memory and experience is not doing much. Then you have the embedded journalists. Can you imagine being an embedded journalist in Iraq or Afghanistan? That's another way of saying, oh, we're muzzled journalists. So they're missing all kinds of major stories. And with the budget cuts for the mass media, there's less foreign bureaus, less reporters in bureaus in the United States for these big newspapers and television networks. So that all those represent a real decay in the mass media.
Absolutely. One of the things Project Censored talks about is framing. And that's a really crucial aspect of censorship that people don't really realize is censorship. And I wanted you to speak, I know that you spoke about this in your talk, but I wanted you to speak about the framing of how the media portrays elections and that whole false dichotomy, the lesser of two evils. Basically, we're fear-mongered into voting against our interests. And I just wanted you to speak about that, even though you did already, just something that you can say, just because it's infuriating. Yeah, I know that you're probably...
framing is a way of excluding, let's face it. I mean, if they frame the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in terms of pro-Israeli, then the slaughter in Gaza and its precedents, and the fact that it was Israelis that broke the truce and had a continuing embargo, it would have been a completely different reporting situation. And that's true in terms of covering the Pentagon, covering the predatory seizure of our natural resources on federal lands which belong to us, or a whole host of subjects that simply are not covered. For example, the stealing from the healthcare expenditures. It's about $250 billion out of a $2.7 trillion. That's $250 billion with a B. And there's a professor at Harvard has documented this. His name is Malcolm Sparrow, and he's the world authority on this, and he's been consultant to various states and federal agencies. He's almost never interviewed by the public, newspapers, or by the TV. And he's a great source. that amount of money would cover the uninsured. And every year, it's $250 billion. So
shared sacrifice. Come on, we all need to cut expenses, except the defense, of course.
Yeah. Now, this is an oligarchy and a plutocracy, pick your word, and that infects the media. Because the media, mass media, is a conglomerate of corporations. And 6 or 7 now control the bulk of TV, radio, magazine, newspaper circulation. When Ben Bagdikian did his first study over 25 years ago, it was about 50 media corporations that had that ratio of control. It's down to about 6 now. So you see where it's going. And that's why Fox News has such an influence, and that's why the Dow Jones, because they get a bigger share by fewer and fewer corporations serving their investments. I mean, they're out for profits. When the Wall Street Journal does all these editorials, always against consumer protection, against the civil justice tort system, against fair taxation, nobody ever says, hey, these Wall Street Journal editorials, they're nothing more than servicing the page after page of corporate advertising in their newspaper. Why give them any credibility at all?
Right. Exactly. And one of the stories in this year's book is about the Tea Party and the astroturfing of what happened in this, and it kind of just goes along with the whole thing that you know, there's a question in the audience, oh, I just hate these tea baggers, and it's the fear that prevents people from really voting with their heart and what they really want to make happen. And you see the Tea Party was just totally co-opted and astroturfed. It's not even really real. There's no substance there. And yeah, I really liked what you said about, both parties will get worse if you keep doing that. And I was wondering if you could maybe just elaborate on why you said that.
Well, the Tea Party started out sort of spontaneously, and there were a lot of different parts of it. There were libertarians, there were conservatives, there were the corporatists, there were the militarists, whatever reason. Then it was hijacked. And it's really interesting how it happened, because first its influence and numbers were hugely exaggerated. They really couldn't turn out that many people, especially since they had their own television network every day pushing it, the Fox network. So the Washington Post wrote an article saying there wasn't more than 300,000 people who had any kind of membership in these Tea Party organizations all over the country. So it was hijacked because the brand name corporatist wing of the Republican Party figured, hey, this is the trademark politically du jour. Grab it, it's valuable.
Yeah.
And so it's really the wing of the Republican Party that has hijacked the Tea Party brand and appropriated this exaggerated aura whose balloon has not been punctured by vigorous investigative reporting. And in Washington, as they say, perception is reality, even though it doesn't reflect any force of numbers out there in the country. So the Tea Party now is the conservative corporatist wing of the the Tea Party now is the resurgence of the conservative, largely non-libertarian wing of the Republican Party, and it's ensconced in Congress.
We interviewed Mike Gravel a couple of weeks ago, and he was just talking about, during the 2008 election, he felt like the game was rigged. He wasn't allowed even on the MSNBC or NBC debates because of GE. How do you feel about candidates who, you try so hard to get in there, and the game's rigged all along? The establishment won't let you, they'll phase you out. And we saw what happened to you in 2000 and 2004, when people still, to this day, Ralph Nader cost or the election, when really there was widespread voter fraud that no one really followed up on, even though it was very blatant. Greg Palast did a great report on it, but it's just amazing that those talking points are still perpetuated, and that the game is really rigged. I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Well, Mike Gravel, he got on the debates early on, but he tried to wing it too much. If he raised enough money just to have an office in Des Moines, or an office in New Hampshire, by the rules of the Democratic primary, they couldn't have excluded him. So he could have lasted a little longer and maybe got a foothold so as to get at least as much attention as Ron Paul did, who spent time trying to raise money. Mike Gravel has a very good proposal, but he thinks it has legs on no money.
Right. Well, do you think the game's rigged?
Of course. Two-party dictatorship, completely rigged, right down to the Presidential Debate Commission, which is a fancy phrase for a private corporation created in 1987 by the Republican Democratic parties to get rid of the League of Women Voters, which supervised presidential debates up to then, and to exclude anyone who they think should not reach tens of millions of Americans.
How do we get people out of this paradigm that they're living in, where they need to do one or the other when both mirror each other?
Well, they have to do what no one can stop them from doing, and that is vote their beliefs and conscience. Don't go tactical and vote for least worst, and every 4 years both parties get worse, and get out and march and demonstrate. That's the first ramparts that gets attention and gets more and more people on board. And last I learned about our system, they can't stop you from marching and demonstrating in front of the right buildings and the right places at the right time all over the country in ever greater numbers.
Civil disobedience, I love Cornel West's kind of turnaround on that. And I know I said that was my last question, but I wanted you really quickly, I just remembered, I mean, this is so relevant with the al-Awlaki assassination. You were talking about Obama's exacerbation of a lot of Bush's foreign policy, and this is, I mean, is this, you've been in politics for a long time, is this open, kind of accepted assassination now of American citizens, is this kind of par for the course? Is this just playing the game of politics, or is this kind of an unprecedented thing that we should be standing up and seeing what's going on?
President Obama, who was a constitutional lecturer, has just torn up another part of the Constitution. Now, he now believes in summary execution of suspects, even American citizens, which violates the due process of law guaranteed by our Constitution. That is an impeachable offense, and that should be an issue in the campaign. He has made Bush look modest in terms of his aggressiveness abroad, and Obama is doing exactly what he said he was going to do, that he thinks that he can send the armed forces anywhere in the world, irrespective of international law, UN Charter, national sovereignties, kill, injure, and crush anything that he, as prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner, thinks needs to be destroyed. That is about as radical an anti-American position, given the founders of our Constitution and our constitutional heritage, as can be imagined, and it was done by an expert in constitutional law, the former president of Harvard Law Review, and a black American. We better get worried.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ralph.